Protests are continuing across India against derogatory comments about the Prophet Muhammad, which were made by two members of the ruling BJP party. On Friday, there were nationwide demonstrations. Security services used force in a number of locations. In the eastern city of Ranchi, the police there fired on a crowd and killed two protesters. The BJP members who made the incendiary comments are accused of inciting hatred and fueling Islamophobia. There have been similar demonstrations in Muslim-majority nations around the world. Some governments have been calling for an official apology from Narendra Modi's administration. Well, let's speak to Khan Mahmudabad, who's a historian and associate professor of political science at Ashoka University. Professor, thank you so much indeed for joining us. How dangerous a moment is this for India?
Thank you for having me. I think this is a tremendously dangerous moment because for the last 8 years, what we've seen is a shift from the marginalization of Muslims to their outright exclusion, whether it is political, legal, institutional, cultural, and social. We are now at the cusp, I think, of a paradigm shift. The latest violence that has erupted has been around comments made by the ruling party spokesperson, Nupur Sharma. And so far, despite tremendous provocation for the last 8 years, Muslims have been lynched for carrying meat. They don't get apartments in cities. Members of the ruling party have consistently made speeches asking for Muslims to be set ablaze, for Muslim women to be raped. So this is not, people are making it out as if this is the first brazen attempt. What is interesting is this is a paradigm shift precisely because the target has gone from being Muslims, and the world has not been that vocal about it so far, into this moment where a blasphemous remark was made. And unfortunately, of course, the violence, which is tremendously reprehensible and should be condemned, is something that will only beget violence. So I think we are sitting on a powder keg, and everyone needs to take stock and step back from the situation, because the BJP, I think, needs to understand that it has facilitated over the last 8 years consistent vilification of Muslims, and this has resulted in now an outright attack on Islam and the figure of the Holy Prophet. And this is something that, of course, has had ramifications much beyond India.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've said so much there, but you're indicating, quoting 2014, that's when Narendra Modi came to power. As a Hindu nationalist, as the leader of a Hindu nationalist party, people were saying back then that this is going to be a danger of this administration. But you're also saying, I believe, that this moment is much greater than the moment itself because of what's been happening over the past 8 years. And therefore, we come to the moment where if the people's psyche has been affected so much over the past 8 years, that whatever the government says to the outside world is not going to make a difference to them in their daily lives because of what they've heard in the past 8 years, how does anybody bring pressure to bear on the BJP to say stop it? Because we have the Congress party, the main opposition party in India, as well as at least a dozen other parties saying to Narendra Modi, be careful because your silence on issues like this is promoting bigotry. But where does the pressure come from to make Modi and his administration change their way of thinking?
So, I think we've already seen international pressure and the effects of it. I think personally it's unfortunate because the Indian government really took cognizance 10 days after when there was a visit by the Vice President to Qatar, and then various states in the Middle East and around the world started issuing statements. And of course, that put a pressure. But Indian Muslims had already been voicing their anxiety and opposition, and those voices should have been listened to. We wouldn't be at this juncture if that wasn't the case. And just to highlight, Adnan, how serious the problem is. Just a few weeks ago, a BJP worker called Kushwaha lynched a man who he thought was Muslim. The man turned out to be from the Jain community, and he wasn't mentally well. And he was lynched to death merely on the suspicion of being Muslim. So the situation has got very bad, and right from the workers to the party MLAs, to even sitting chief ministers who have made tremendously provocative statements, there has been an atmosphere which has been created in the country. The top leadership has largely remained silent, and this has been taken as a tacit acknowledgement that this Islamophobia and vilification can go on. But unfortunately, I think the biggest threat is not going to emerge to any one community, but to India as a nation, because of course the instability that can result from any social problems and factionalism and pressure will destabilize the entire country. I think we're sitting at a very, very important juncture, and the pressure, the world community has brought about pressure, but I'm afraid what that was a last resort. What we are looking at right now is a situation that has been going on. The world has unfortunately been somewhat silent about it over the last many years. Some people, of course, have spoken up, but I think what is needed is an international growing concern and awareness about the kind of civil strife that is taking root in India at the moment.
Just briefly, if you don't mind, Professor, you see, my point is that I'm not sure if the international pressure is going to change thinking at a very local level, in a village, for example, because it's so much above a normal person's head. Is India now in severe danger of philosophically not any longer becoming or being a secular democracy, and where minorities simply can't live in peace?
So I think, definitely it's very difficult to be a minority, and particularly for the Muslims and for the Christians. Of course, the violence against Dalits, the so-called lower castes, and women continues, but Muslims particularly, and Muslim women. And I think the solution has to be internal. Unfortunately, my own opinion is that this is no longer simply a political problem, which political parties by winning elections can fix, because as you said, the rot has set in very deep. And I think what is needed is a figure of moral authority that can speak from within the tradition of Hinduism, who can challenge these people who I think speak in the name of the Hindu religion, but actually are simply concerned with political gain and have very little to do with religion, as we've seen the case across the world, and all those ideologies have sought to use religion for political ends. They have precious little to do with the religion and just see it in a very utilitarian way for their political objectives. Perhaps this is the moment where India needs another Gandhi.
Professor Ali Khan Mahmudabad, thank you so much indeed, Professor.